So now, how does skeletal muscle get to contract? So the contraction of skeletal muscle is an interplay between the nervous system and the control on the muscles. So the first thing is you remember we said that skeletal muscles are voluntary, like you control them. So the first thing is you tell yourself, I want to contract my muscle, I want to move. That desire to want to move will start from the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex. And then the information has to pass through what we call the basal ganglia, but that's not for you for now. So information will come from the cerebrum. So you have got nerves that are coming from the central nervous system, from the cerebrum. We call them upper motor neurons. This neuron will send the instruction to the spinal cord. So from the spinal cord, we are going to have now a neuron going from the spinal cord to the muscle. We call it a lower motor neuron. And this is what you can see here. That lower motor neuron is going to reach to a muscle on what we call the neuromuscular junction. At this point, action potential, because for you, communication in the body is just via action potential. That's the language that the body understands. So that action potential is going to, once you say I want to move, action potential is going to spread, and then it is going to come and reach on the neuromuscular junction. When action potential reaches here, what it is going to do is it is going to, when action potential reaches this the synaptic terminal of the nerve, it is going to cause calcium to start entering. Okay, so calcium will be entering the nerve. When calcium starts entering the nerve, what will happen is that now the acetylcholine, which is stored in vesicles, is going to be released via exocytosis. At this point now, since the acetylcholine has been released, acetylcholine is going to come and attach on the receptors on the muscle. When it attaches on the receptors on the muscle, action potential now is going to also be created in the muscle, and then it will spread via the T tubules. Okay, so action potential in the muscle cell membrane is going to be propagated to the T tubules by the spread of local currents. So T tubules are continuous with the sarcolemmal membrane, and they'll be able to carry depolarizations. So depolarization of the T tube is going to be caused by, it will cause a critical conformational change in these dihydropyridine receptors. Okay. When the dihydropyridine receptors change because of the action potential, they are going to open calcium release channels, which are the iodine receptors, which are found on the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So, the T tubule, the hydropyridine receptors are L-type voltage gated calcium channels. Calcium influx into the cell through these channels is not required for excitation, contraction, coupling skeletal muscles. Please take note of this. CICR is not necessary for skeletal muscles. CICR is calcium induced calcium release is important for cardiac muscles, but not in skeletal muscles. Because these channels in skeletal muscles, take note, in the T tubules, the calcium channels in skeletal muscles are L type. Okay. So when calcium release channels open, calcium is released from the storage, and then it will be released into the ICF, the intracellular fluid compartment. And then the calcium is going to go and bind to the troponin C. So when calcium binds to troponin C, what happens is that troponin C can bind up to as many as 4 calcium ions per molecule. Okay, per molecule of troponin C. So the binding is cooperative. Each molecule of bound calcium increases the affinity for troponin C for the next calcium. So when one calcium binds to troponin C, it increases the affinity for the next calcium and more the affinity for the other one. So they will be binding more and more. So even a small increase in calcium concentration increases the likelihood that all of the binding sites will be occupied. So the conformation change in troponin causes tropomyosin, which was previously blocking the interference of actin and myosin, to be removed. Remember, I said when calcium binds to troponin C, that will activate troponin I, which was binding on the heads of actin, to move out. Okay, when they move out, that will mean that the actin is now free, can now interact with the myosin, and they are going to form what we call cross bridges. So with calcium bound to troponin C and tropomyosin moved out of the way, myosin heads can now bind to actin. That's known as cross bridge. Formation of cross bridge is associated with the breakdown of ATP and the generation of force. So without ATP, that contraction actually cannot happen. Okay. And for relaxation of skeletal muscle to also happen, you still need calcium. And for skeletal muscle, the calcium is going to only be taken back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that's when relaxation is going to happen. So calcium will move from ICF back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It will be released from troponin C. And then tropomyosin will still go back and attach on the actin, the myosin binding site on the actin. And as long as ice intracellular calcium concentration is low, then it means that the cross bridges cannot be formed. Okay. So what happens is that if someone dies, they they are going to use up the last ATP to contract. And so they will remain contracted because there's no more ATP to cause relaxation. And that is known as rigor mortis. That's why someone dies, you close their eyes, you make sure that they are straight, because if they contract and then you use up the last ATP, they'll remain like that. So this is the overview of how contraction happens in skeletal muscle. So you can find an essay for you to write. The first thing is there will be action potential in the muscle membrane, and then depolarization is going to spread to the T tubules, and then that is going to open the sarcoplasmic reticulum calcium release channels, which are the radon receptors, and that is going to increase calcium concentration in the cytosol, and then calcium is going to bind to troponin C, and then tropomyosin is going to be moved, okay, and allow the interaction. So it will be moved from the myosin binding site, which is present on actin, and that allows actin and myosin to interact, forming cross bridges, okay, and generating a force. And then when contraction has happened, calcium will be taken back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then relaxation happens. So there's something which is known as tetanus. How does it happen? So a single action potential in results in the release of fixed amount of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that will produce a single contraction, a single twitch, because of a single action potential. That twitch or contraction is going to be terminated when relaxation occurs, when the sarcoplasmic reticulum takes back that calcium. But what happens sometimes is that when muscle is stimulated repeatedly, there is no enough time for the sarcoplasmic reticulum to take back all the calcium. And so the calcium in the cytoplasm doesn't go back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And so relaxation will not be able to happen. So the levels of calcium will remain high, and it results, because it's still high in the cytoplasm, the calcium will still be bound to troponin C, and that means that the cross bridges will continue forming. And in that state, there is sustained contraction, and that's what is known as tetanus. Okay, that's tetanus. Another thing you need to know about skeletal muscles is that skeletal muscles can be divided into those that are known as slow twitch, the fast twitch. The slow twitch, we call them slow oxidative fibers. The fast twitch, we call them, divided into the fast oxidative and fast glycolytic.